Hello, this is Ed Chapman, and this video cast is going to focus on the cell membrane and how materials get into and out of the cell membrane. Because the cell membrane is semi-permeable, it controls what passes into and out of the cytoplasm, so we can think of the cell membrane as a gatekeeper. And the first part of this unit, we're going to be talking about the structure of the cell membrane. The structure of the cell membrane is based on three components. They are phospholipids, proteins, and cholesterol molecules. And these three things combine to build this double-layered structure that we see that surrounds all living cells. And let's look at this picture a little bit more closely, and we can identify these parts. All right, we have the phospholipids, okay, which look like little balloons with two tails attached. They're on the top and the bottom of the cell membrane, and there are millions of them. There are proteins, which are kind of like pieces of chewing gum stuck in the phospholipid double layer or bilayer. And then there are cholesterol molecules, which are kind of placed here and there in between the phospholipids on both sides of the double membrane. And they all have their own functions. Now note that this cell membrane is a bilayer. It's made up of two layers kind of forming like a sandwich. Okay, so the bilayer is this bottom layer here, okay, which is on the cytoplasm side, and then we have another double layer very similar to it on the environment side. So this is the outside of the cell out here, and this is the cytoplasm down here. All right, now basically cells are made up of this double layer of phospholipids, and this double layer of phospholipids is surrounding water or a watery environment. Now, if you want to think of this as cytoplasm in here, that's perfectly fine. The cytoplasm is mostly water. And then cells exist or live in a watery environment, okay? So if you think about it, the phospholipid bilayer is actually a layer that's separating a water on the inside and waters on the outside. And because the inside of a cell makes up a living cell and the outside environment is not alive, the cell membrane is actually the boundary between a living cell and everything that makes up a living cell and the environment it's living in. And if you're an individual cell like a paramecium or an amoeba or a bacteria, your environment is your whole world. It's everything surrounding your single cell. If you're multicellular, you may have many cells hooked together to form a tissue, all right? But all cells exist in a watery environment or a watery solution. Now, the cell membrane has to control the traffic of material exiting and entering the cytoplasm. So this boundary has to control what enters and exits the cells in order to maintain the balance of life that we call homeostasis, okay? It's basically staying alive. And if a cell gets out of balance because too much material enters or exits a cell, it can die because it's lost its balance or its homeostasis. So think of the cell membrane, remember, as a gatekeeper. It's controlling what moves in and what moves out of the cell. Now, phospholipids make up most of the mass of a cell membrane, and phospholipids basically have two parts. Okay, there is a head part, which is kind of the balloon-shaped part right here, okay, which is actually made up of a phosphate group. Okay, a phosphate group is made up of a phosphate and four oxygens, and it's what's symbolized here by this circle. This diagram is showing the same thing. Here's the phosphate group, okay, and what's cool about this phosphate head is that it's hydrophilic. Okay, and hydrophilic means it attracts water molecules. So little water molecules are going to form hydrogen bonds and stick to this. Okay, so the phosphate head of phospholipids will dissolve in water. So it likes to touch water molecules. All right, now the tail part down here, there's two of them. One's got a bend and one's straight. These are hydrophobic, which means they repel water. They will not form hydrogen bonds. So water, these literally cannot get wet. And they're made up of fatty acids. So we've got a fatty acid chain here and a fatty acid chain here. And they're attached to the phosphate group. Same thing here, fatty acid chain, fatty acid chain. And so together, the phosphate head and the two fatty acid tails make up this whole structure that we call a phospholipid. And it's kind of a schizophrenic molecule. It simultaneously has one part that wants to dissolve in water and tails that do not want to dissolve in water. Okay? And this means that a bilayer or a double layer is the only way that phospholipids can arrange themselves so that their heads are touching the watery part, either on the inside or on the outside, and their tails are staying away from water or are protected from the water. So this is the only arrangement physically that you can make that will meet these two goals, that because the phospholipid head is hydrophilic and the tails are hydrophobic. Okay, now proteins and cholesterols are stuck into the phospholipid bilayer. All right, so you notice there is a protein embedded here. It comes in all the way through. Here's the top of one that we can't really see all of. Here's another one we can kind of cut away and see it stuck into the bilayer and so forth. So the protein molecules are embedded in the membrane. So we call them embedded proteins, and they have a function we're going to talk about later. All right. The cholesterol molecules are also stuck between the phospholipids, but they are either on the inside layer or the outside layer. So let me highlight some cholesterols here. Here's a cholesterol to here. All right, and the more cholesterol there is in the bilayer, the more flexible the cell membrane is at low temperatures. Okay, so organisms that are cells that live in cold water or animals that have tissues that are exposed to cold water have more cholesterol in their cell membranes, which keeps them flexible and not so they don't get too stiff when it gets cold. Now, if we look closely at this, you can see what we're talking about. Here is phospholipid with its tails, phospholipid with its tails, and here's a cholesterol molecule stuck between them, all right? So you can see every so often in the bilayer you have a cholesterol molecule. Okay, thanks for listening, and the next video cast is going to be about diffusion.